Gentlemen, the City of Farmers Branch study session meeting. It is June 1st, 2021. The time is 3 p.m. We'll begin, and just first off, welcome back upstairs. It's been over a year since we've been all here. Completely different set of people kind of sitting here now, so kind of exciting. But as always, we will begin with our regular agenda items, A1. So I'll start to my right, Councilmember Driscoll.
Don't have anything right now.
Okay. Councilmember Ratana.
Are we going to discuss I don't remember last time, did we usually discuss the liaison appointments during?
It's a regular agenda item. We can discuss it downstairs, or we can discuss it here if we like, and
Okay.
just take action downstairs.
Okay, because I think that's what we did last time, if I recall. But no, just wondering how you wanted to handle that.
Yeah, I think we can handle it here.
Okay. Okay, that's the only question I had on my end.
Okay. Well, do you want to start? Is
We can
there
do that at the
anything?
end. We can do
Oh,
that at the end. That's if
The
you
end?
want.
Okay. So is that all you had?
That's all I had.
Okay. Councilmember Lynn.
No questions.
Councilmember Williams.
No questions.
Councilmember Merritt.
Only one.
Go ahead.
What's the city's definition of a policy?
Definition of a policy?
Yes. Do we have one?
A definition of what I don't think we do.
Okay. That's fine. We'll talk more.
Okay.
That's fine.
All right.
No other questions.
All right. Well, then, if everyone wants to, I guess, take a look at the city liaisons list, we can kind of handle the discussion points of I-1 right now. Is there anyone that wants to fill any open spot or take one over?
Well, I had a question about I know for the Metroplex Mayor's Committee, was Norwood on as mayor pro tem? So,
He was,
okay,
in case I couldn't go.
okay, so then would that be one that I would need to fill?
In theory, yeah.
I'd like to put myself up for the Dallas County Public Health Advisory Committee, because I know that's opened with Baumgartner being out.
Is that an issue with your,
No, because Baumgartner was on there before. It's fine. It's a court. I'm on there anyways for work, so. And then I was going to open up the Dallas Regional Mobility if somebody else wanted to participate in that one. So I wanted to see if I could get on the Texas Municipal League. I saw there was you and Blackson were on it before, but I don't know if anybody else replaced him.
on this list? I guess it says currents, Driscoll, because he took over for Blackson, but
Oh, okay,
that hasn't
that's
been
right.
discussed yet.
Okay.
I guess who's actually taking that piece. So if you two want to talk about that.
Do you have a preference?
Well, I just thought I'd stay with the ones I had from
Okay,
when I
no.
got in November.
Oh, I
but,
didn't know. I saw maybe I had an old list. So I still had Blackson on mine. Okay.
Well, let me look at yours since I didn't print it out.
No, so, I'm already on North Texas Commission, which talks a lot about mobility. So I didn't know if anybody wanted to do the Dallas Regional Mobility Coalition.
And that's for transportation.
That's
I said
transportation.
mobility.
Yeah, only because TML does a lot of policy stuff, but I have no, I can stay.
Councilmember Lynn, are there any that you were interested in?
In that regards, it's been adopted by council.
Any at all? I mean,
Chamber of Commerce.
Farmers Branch?
Yep.
You know what? All yours. I know you're heavily involved there,
If the
so.
macro text chamber on there.
No, it's just Metro. It's
Trinity
Metro.
Trinity River Authority is open, and since Councilwoman Williams took over the Dallas Health with Mike's departure, I'll take over for John, if that's all right.
Sounds great.
Well, we voted on that a couple of meetings ago, that I'm doing the Trinity River Authority.
Oh.
If you
Oh, I
recall.
think
You're not, obviously.
yeah.
Okay,
So,
I apologize.
Do you want to do the,
Well, then I'll do the mobility
do you want to
one.
do the
Yeah,
regional
I'll do
mobility?
the
I
mobility
mean,
one.
that's one on transit, so I think that one's a
Sure.
really good one.
That's fine.
And I wouldn't mind
I'm on
doing,
like 4, so.
I wouldn't mind doing the Travel Expense Review Committee. That seems to be right up my usual
Right up your
alley,
alley.
so,
Makes sense.
yeah.
Terry, do you still want to stay on that as well as Councilmember Driscoll?
I would say if anybody else wants to be on that, otherwise I'll stay.
Guess we'll just keep it Driscoll, Williams, and Lynn this time. Are there any others?
And you're on Sister City, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that just leaves the Metroplex Mayor's Committee open.
Unfortunately,
Norwood's.
COVID's
Yeah,
kind
Deputy,
Oh, okay.
or
Oh,
Mayor
she's
Pro
gonna
Tem and
take it.
Mayor.
Okay.
She just took
of,
that.
unfortunately,
Yep.
because of the pandemic, that's kind
Oh,
of.
yeah.
But hopefully we'll be coming back.
And who's a municipal judge? Lynn and,
She's looking at, you have a
I
different,
have a
Amy, who
different- I
else
think I have a
do we
different
have for municipal
Yes, I
judge?
do.
she's got an older list
I do.
or different.
That's not on the one I have.
We'll talk about that on June 9th.
Talk about it on June 9th?
Okay.
Okay, all right. Do you have the list of, I guess, who we slotted right now? Okay. Are we able to pass that around before the actual meeting? Okay. I just want everyone to look at it one last time before we vote. But it sounds like we've kind of filled all our positions. Does anyone feel differently?
Looks like we've covered.
Cool.
No. And you wanted to stay on TML, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. You're on the MetroCrest Social Services, right?
Okay. All right.
Here.
I think that does it. We will now move on to A2, presentation of street road hump policy. Mr. Bentley.
Mayor, members of the council, this is a request by Councilmember Ratana to kind of get a refresher on the road hump policy, kind of get an idea of what the policy's all about, and then let y'all discuss what you want to do. The criteria that has been established for the road hump is, the first step is basically the residents representing 25% of the properties that are going to be affected in the stretch of roadway that's going to have the road hump need to submit in writing a request for the hump. At that time, what we used to do was we would then go in and start evaluating it. But what had changed is we started looking at it and we go, well, step 3, we start spending money to do studies. So we moved step 2 up because that was really the final determination whether there was humps or not. So the step 2 was then go to the fire department and the police department and say, do you have any issues with having road humps in this area, and let them make their determination. Once they make their determination,
stay open. Sorry.
if it's yay or nay, whichever way, nay, it stops. It goes no further. If it's yay, then we keep moving. Then step 3 would be, we need to make sure that the street length is 1,000 feet or more, that the 85th percentile of the speed on that street is greater than or equal to 36 miles per hour. Traffic volumes must be within 300 to 1,000 vehicles per day. And then at that point, if everything passes, then we would need to get petitions signed by 80% of the property owners, again, that is affected by that stretch of the roadway that the hump would be placed in. The additional, we added another step to it, and that was the last time the ordinance was passed. And that is if there's no fire department and police department objection, however, it didn't meet the other criterias, then at that point, you'd need to have 100% of the property owners sign accepting it. The residents would need to pay 50% of the road hump cost, and the cost on an installation, typical installation of 2 road humps is $6,000. So that is the basis of where the policy is currently and the way Public Works looks at it. And so, sorry, find another slide in there. But anyway, so I'll be glad to let y'all discuss it, and answer questions, and go from there.
Sure. So one of the reasons why I brought it up is I've been getting a lot of different inquiries from folks related to speed, specifically in my area, but now in other areas of the city. And so For purposes of those listening, I want to make sure it was a refresher for everybody, but also I wanted to really talk about what would happen if fire and police say no. Is there any other course that a resident could go through? Because I will tell you, some areas of my district are very narrow, and you have people with multiple vehicles that it's a, you know, it was, the houses were built a very long time ago, so it's only one car garages, but half of their vehicles are parked along the street. So fire already has to go, and like if there's something going on, they already have to kind of go slower than they probably would. And so I kind of, if we need to do a study, maybe, I'm not sure, but if it's a matter of seconds that it deters folks, but yet it's something where children are at play and parents are really worried about them getting, you know, run over because of how fast people are driving on this street, we kind of have to potentially come up with a solution. Because I know that in 2 instances, police and fire have said no. But at the end of the day, when you look at the street, it's already very narrow to where they have to go really slow already because of how many vehicles are on there. But what's happening is that kids cannot, if kids are playing ball outside, they can't see anything because of all the vehicles. And so people are going very, very fast. And I know we installed some some stop signs in one of the particular areas, so I appreciate that. I know the residents are very happy with that, but then people are ignoring the street signs. So that's one of the reasons why. Has there been discussion in the past about a potential like option? We have, you know, option 1, which is you have to meet these criteria. Option 2 would be if police and fire don't say no, but it doesn't meet the rest of the criteria. Is there an option 3 to where we can do a study of some sort in a particular stretch of area? Because there have been recently, I think over the past year, maybe there have been at least 3 or 4 instances where a child almost got run over because of the speed. And so that's really the reason why I wanted to bring it up today. And obviously Chief Vargas would have a lot to do in the conversation, seeing as how it would affect, you know, fire and response time as well as Chief Hale. But that's the purpose of me bringing it up, to see if it's something that y'all talked about before.
We have had no discussion of an option 3, to be
Okay.
honest with you. But to allude to the fire department and everything else, even though the speeds, I'll let Chief Vargas speak to that, because I know it's not just the speeds, it's the damage to the equipment of constantly going over road humps.
Got it, okay.
People in an ambulance that's critical going to a hospital and you're going over road hump. That's not, and those
Okay.
are some of the things that they have expressed that is part of the reason, but I'll let Chief
Sure.
Vargas speak to that.
Thank you, sir.
Gabriel Martin for Branch Fire Chief. What Mark Millian said, he's correct. You're right, like on B Street, it's narrow, or Wicker is narrow, so we slow down, but at a constant rate, we go down to 10 to 15 miles per hour. But for a hump, totally different. We're almost down to a stop, maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour. We go over it because it's a big rig. And the ambulance, so you're right. When we do CPR back there, we have a tube wrapped someone's throat, and we're literally bagging him. And if the driver doesn't know until, hey, we're about to hit it, we have to stop. Because one dislodge, we go too in or too far out with the
Sure.
reassess the patient. So those are the 2 big ones right there. They really slows down our response to an emergency.
And just for those listening, could you go over kind of the stipulations that you have over when you decide whether a street is when you're able to make that recommendation or not make the recommendation of the humps?
Especially when we go there often.
Okay.
So if it's a dead-end street, I wouldn't have no problem with that.
Gotcha.
But if it's something we use common, we go to point A to point B, say fire station to an emergency, yes, that we use commonly in route.
So there's not, if there isn't an option 2, then that's when we would, basically, that's when you would decide we can't, there's no other route, so we would have to do it that way.
Yeah.
Okay. Has there been instances where you have done any studies in particular in certain areas of our city related to response time in order for us to really validate whether a road hump is necessary or not?
I don't remember that.
No,
Okay.
no studies in that fact, no.
Okay. Okay. And again, I would hate for there to be a child getting run over before we actually take a look at this, you know what I mean? And so that's why I was just trying to figure out if there is an option 3, potentially if everybody along that street, if we had 100% signatures, that everybody wanted this road hump, if that was a possibility. But I understand there's a life and death situation that happens. And I guess, you know, we may just have to continue to look at it in a case-by-case basis. But I would like to maybe explore it with you all and see if maybe other cities are doing something. And again, when I visited two of the streets, there are a lot of kids that live there. And it's not during the day per se, but it's when everybody is back home from work, everybody's parked, you can't see anything. And so it just really worries me. And I know a lot of the parents have expressed their concerns. So maybe it's something we can just continue to talk offline, but I at least wanted to do the briefing for it because I know a lot of folks couldn't be here, so that way they can look at it. Because they've been giving me a lot of questions about it. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
So just to kind of give you a little bit of information, if we just back up to the one that kind of started the last go-round was Primrose. Primrose, fire department had no problem with it, and because Primrose is not a street that they're going to use to go anywhere. If they're going anywhere, they're going to Primrose, not using it to get to another street. It goes the way it sets up with Valley View and Webb Chapel and the other streets around it. What was surprising about Primrose, we found that the 85th percentile of the speed was at 32 miles an hour, barely over the speed limit. Didn't meet the criteria anyway. Primrose is a wider street, doesn't have a lot of cars parked on it, so you'd expect people to drive faster on that street than you would Wasena or Brandywine. Being a little tighter, people are gonna have a tendency to go. And actually, I'd actually be surprised if it came back and met the criteria of 36 miles per hour. So it's a perception.
Sure.
Smaller the street, you feel like the car's going faster, but the problem you have is not necessarily the car going too fast. It's just a car driving at normal speed limit and a kid darting out in front of them.
Yeah.
You're gonna have that no matter where, and you can't control that.
Sure.
That's just something that's just uncontrollable.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the biggest piece in my district is the fact that there's so many vehicles parked and you can't
They are.
really.
They
you
line
can't
that street.
see exactly, and I think that's
I
the
know.
biggest,
Yeah.
the biggest concern. So,
Yeah.
well, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
One other point. Not everybody likes the road hump on their street. That's why we wanted to get to that 100%. And I know on Primrose, all but one would sign off on it. And, you know, we just kept having this circle of, we've got all these signatures except for this one house, but that one house was opposed to it. Now, they were putting their house for sale, and they didn't want to do anything that would hurt that. Once they sold the house, we approached the new property owner, and they were okay with it. But sometimes people have very strong opinions the other way, too.
Yeah, they do. Definitely. Thank you.
Hold on. Councilmember Lynn, do you have anything? I'm gonna go.
Mark, does it cost anything to do a speed study?
Yes, sir, roughly anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000.
Okay.
That's the reason why we switched, because we were spending that money and then finding out it was for
Yeah.
naught. So we switched that around to say, wait a minute, before we start spending money, let's make sure everybody's good with this.
Okay, and I believe that we also said that if the humps are installed and then subsequent, the residents decide they didn't want them, they have to pay for the
They have to
removal.
pay for the removal, that is correct. I didn't add that on there, but that is correct.
Okay,
They 50,
yeah.
if we do it at the 100%, they pay for 50 to install it and they pay for 100% to remove it.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so Councilwoman, just to give you a little information, so a lot of people have complained about the speed on Ridge Oak between Marsh and Templeton Trail. There's one stop sign on that street, and people run that stop sign all the time, okay? I've probably been asked in 5 years, maybe a dozen times at least, why can't we have road humps on Ridge Oak? And it's up to the fire department at that point, because that is a main thoroughfare that they use to get to so many other places. So that didn't necessarily satisfy people, but they certainly understood it.
Sure.
And, you know, we've had discussion in the past about the overcrowding of streets as it relates to parking. And unfortunately, nobody wants to take that on a trial basis. For example, in older parts of Oak Cliff where you have some narrow streets, they've gone to parking on one side of the street only. And it's worked well down there, or it has worked. We even toured some of that several years ago, but nobody was willing to try that here. I have streets, you look at Myra or Damascus, and some of the streets down by Dallas Medical Center that are very narrow. And at night, I drive a Tahoe, and it's very difficult for me to get through Myra without my mirrors hitting somebody else's mirror. I would say I probably have way less than a foot clearance on both sides when there are vehicles parked on both sides of the street. So my truck's the same, or my car's same size as our police vehicles, but I would think fire truck or an ambulance is gonna have even tougher time. And they may even nick some mirrors as they're going down the street on some of those overcrowded streets. But again, nobody has wanted to say, okay, we need to try this in an area first and see what kind of reception it gets and what the outcome is gonna be.
Councilman Lynn, we did attempt that on Hartside.
On where?
On Hartside, we went door to door and asked residents to come to a listening meeting at the recreation center, but frankly, they were not interested in doing anything to remove cars from the.
That must have been before my time, so.
That was a while
Okay.
back, but we have tried that. And there is one street off of Webb Chapel where I think we've prohibited parking for the first
We
two
did
or
that on
three houses
Damascus,
back. Yeah.
on Damascus, and
Yeah.
now we've just put letters out on Myra for at least the first two houses on both sides of the street. And those letters went out, and I did get a call from one resident who was thanking me for saying she's been waiting for years for the city to do this. We've had a number of people complain that it's hard to exit Webb Chapel onto specifically Myra, because when their cars are parked at the first house, which would be on the corner of Myra and Webb Chapel, it's very difficult, and same for pulling out. So now we're going to try to do the same, no parking for the first two homes on each side of the street. Myra, Damascus, Brisbane may be the next street. There's a little bit more room there, but we'll have to see how that goes. I think it's Brisbane.
It's in Brisbane.
It begins with B.
Okay.
Are those letters something that the city is sending out to the residents for safety reasons, that you can't park during certain times on the corners? 2 cars out, or where are the letters coming from?
So,
Councilman Lynn received some concerns from residents on Myra, and so he approached me about what would be the process, and I said, we have, in talking to Mark, he indicated that the city can go in and just arbitrarily say, you can't park for those two, on both sides, those first two lots. However, obviously, that's going to disrupt the property owner to some degree. And so Councilman Lynn approached me, and he put together a letter, and I said, we can put that out on city letterhead and deliver it to each of the homeowners and see what response we get back.
Like a request?
A request,
Not a
yes.
requirement?
Yeah,
Gotcha,
correct. Yeah,
okay.
we didn't say, this is going to happen in 2 weeks. It was more of a request. And with the thought that if we heard back adversely or didn't hear back at all, that would be an acceptance. And after a certain amount of time, we'd go ahead and install the street sign. So that's the process we're going through.
and it was in English and Spanish.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So
So there are
is it-
some of those corners in District 1 that could benefit from something
So,
like that, yeah.
if
Interesting.
you want to share that letter
Yeah, I would
with
love to- I would love to see
Councilwoman,
that
that
letter,
might
yeah.
be
Yeah, of course.
of benefit to help
Yes.
at least some of
Thank
it.
you. Definitely. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Williams, anything? Councilmember Merritt?
No, not at this time, thank you.
Councilmember Driscoll?
Yes, I have one question, Mr. Bentley. For the criteria here that you've outlined, wouldn't it be difficult on many of the streets to meet the hurdle rate of 300 to 1,000 vehicles per day?
That's
Obviously not on the thoroughfares, but on a lot of the side streets.
well, that's a kind of an industry standard for the road humps that most cities use. Ours is doctored around most other cities.
Right.
And that's just, actually, we had it different. It was actually 400 to 4,000, and we changed it to 300 to 1,000 because it takes an awful lot of cars to really create a nuisance, to be
Right.
honest.
That's what I was thinking.
And you gotta have a major traffic volume on that street to really make it be an issue.
I was thinking just using that criteria, I would think that would preclude most of our side
And
streets,
it actually,
that kind of volume.
it kind of does. I mean, now, we don't, if you don't pass all of them, it doesn't say it takes it completely out, but Primrose, for an example, failed every one of them, so.
I think the difference too is like the ones that I've gotten from my district, people use those streets like Wasina and whatnot to pass through during school hours whenever they're getting picked
Yeah.
up, because they don't want to go 10 miles,
Right,
20 miles an
right,
hour, so
right.
they become a through street, which is why a lot of people just zoom right through those since it's during the day and on
Yeah.
That's the same with Millwood, because they cut off to avoid
The speed zone?
The speed zone, the kids'
School zone,
crosswalk.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I know they applied for it too. So,
All right. Mr. Bentley, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is A3, presentation to council to review proposed updates to Chapter 56, property maintenance. Mr. Bonanno.
It's not 2020 anymore, is it? It's 2021. I'll get there, hang on.
Some folks are still in 2020.
Let's see.
This one would be in 2019.
Thank you. I heard you. Rescue me. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Officer Leo Bonanno. I'm your code enforcement manager. And I'm here today, once again, to go through some of the proposed changes that the Code Enforcement Task Force and now my office are recommending as we look to update Chapter 56, which is the property maintenance code for the city. A quick reminder to all of you as to how we got here. On January 5th, the mayor chose to create a code enforcement task force that the rest of the council supported. All of the council members at that time, we have some new people now, but at that time, selected 2 individuals from their districts that were allowed to participate in this task force and share their thoughts, walk through the codes with me. And Mr. Williamson joined us in every meeting. We had Mr. Bronson Blackson, who was our chairperson, and even Miss Williams was a part of the task force at the time. And we walked through various elements of the property maintenance code and other codes relating to property maintenance and discussed suggestions that the task force might want to make for changes. And here we have just a blurb here. The last time I was in front of you was May 4th, and the presentation that I gave on May 4th was strictly to highlight the recommendations that the task force made and to thank them for their work. Today, I'm in front of you to go through some examples of the changes that the task force recommended and also some from my own office. So that's what brings us here today. And some of these early slides are very easy to understand, so please stop me if I go too fast, but they seem to speak for themselves. What we have here is one example of a change that is a pretty important one. We have property maintenance codes spread throughout the code of ordinances in our city. They are everywhere. And this is an example of what we're dealing with currently. On the left-hand side, you'll see that property maintenance, environmental codes, building regulations, and signs all start repeating themselves. All of these are property maintenance standards in one way or another, yet they are spread over 4 different chapters in the code. That makes it very difficult for people to find and understand. When laws are updated, if you don't remember what they touch, then they now conflict with something old that you forgot was there. And so having things so spread out this way is really not a best practice when it comes to dealing with ordinances, at least in the world of code enforcement. So the first the first suggestion that my office is making is this, to bring all of these related codes together into Chapter 56, which is where they all really belong. To bring everything together in just one nice package so that the public does not have to dig. I can't tell you how many phone calls I've gotten in the short time I've been here of people who are very engaged and want to know what the laws and the rules are and call my office and say, I can't find it. That's actually a great thing. I'm glad people are so proactive about it. And there's nothing more disheartening than finding out, well, I couldn't find the law, so I just did what I thought was best. And then having to tell that person, well, you missed the mark, you broke the law. I hate having to do that. So trying to make this easier for the reader is really my personal number one goal, and this is the first step in doing that. Once all of the codes are consolidated, we'd like to get them in an organized format. This is actually our real code on the left-hand side, Chapter 56, looks just like this. It has definitions repeated twice. It has parking separated from the other elements of the code for really no discernible reason. And so the proposition I'm making again over on the right is to get all of these things together and then flesh out the different topics. Exterior grounds over on the left covers trash, vegetation, everything that has to do with the outside of a building. But you would not know that by looking at the title. Exterior ground, that's an awful lot of stuff. And in my opinion, it should flow more like a helpful table of contents. Where can I find grass and weeds rules? Where can I find rules about tree limbs? Well, that's in the vegetation section. It's now very easy to see. So again, just taking what we have and shuffling it around to make it easier for folks to find. The next suggestion that the task force made, and I concurred with, of course, was increasing clarity with new and updated definitions. The layperson who interacts with a code enforcement officer really doesn't have any idea how important the definitions of words are. When we're reading the law, what we think a word means isn't always what that word means. And so definitions need to be very clear when they're there. And unfortunately, we are missing some very needed definitions. For example, the law requires that a tenant in a building have hot water. And that's what it says, hot water. That's it. Well, what is hot water? Hot water to me is probably different than hot water to you. Well, the CDC recommends hot water be 120 degrees because 120 degrees kills most household germs. So you'll find in a recommendation of mine down the road that I recommend we define hot water as 120 degrees, and that's why. So we have, again, these words, these phrases that we do not have defined. And when we don't have words defined, it opens up this big subjective discussion. What does this really mean? What did they mean when they wrote it? Definitions kind of cut through all that gray and help everyone stay on the same page. It helps officers enforce the law, educate folks on the law. So again, new and updated definitions are really important when it comes to writing the law. Another discussion that we had with the task force, and they agreed, was eliminating redundancies in the law. And this is the most prevalent example, and I do keep coming back to it. But this is an example of one regulation appearing 4 different times, and it's almost exactly the same in every place. Keep your outside stairs in good condition. Keep your outside stairs in good condition. Keep inside stairs in good condition. Keep public stairs in good condition. We get it. Stairs are important, you know, but couldn't that just be combined and just say all stairs? Do we really have to force the public to read all of this? And I wonder, these are the 4 I found. How many more are there that I didn't find? See, now you start to even doubt yourself as an enforcer or as a reader. What else am I not? What else am I missing? These stairs appear everywhere. And so this issue does come up a number of times on a number of topics. And so this is an example of what we would do. We would pull them all together, have one broad statement to address everything, and then eliminate the ones that are in other chapters that don't belong there. There are several contradictions in the law as it exists right now. In the Property Maintenance Code, the law states that your grass and weeds cannot grow any taller than 8 inches. Well, in the environmental code, it says 12 inches. Those are both on the books right now. And I found them, and that's kind of a big deal. Grass and weeds is kind of like code enforcement bread and butter, especially this time of year. They're a constant source of, I don't want to say complaints so much, but they're very visible. It's very visible, it's very noticeable. It's one of those things that a lot of people know is wrong, that's wrong, whenever they see it. And so it's really important to have the law consistent and right. So I recommend over on the right-hand side that we choose a height for that. Now, the Code Enforcement Task Force recommended 12 inches. It can be 12 inches, it can be another number that you folks decide on, but it just needs to be one number. We can't have a hodgepodge of numbers. Another thing that the task force wanted was an exemption from cutting grass under certain circumstances, mainly those native grasses that we see in landscaping arrangements, those big, beautiful, bushy grasses that are meant to be tall. Well, there's no exemption for those in the law right now, which means if we enforce the law by the letter, you'd have to cut those down just as you would your own lawn. And of course, I don't think that that's probably what the original writers of this intended. So correcting something that the task force thought was left out seems like a good idea. Another contradiction that we have is early in chapter 56, we talk about trash being illegal, and it should be. Trash is a significant health hazard. It attracts pests and smells and all sorts of, nothing good comes from trash, nothing good at all. But later on in the code, we see, oh, but it's okay to have trash under your carport for 7 days. Why? An instant contradiction. Trash is terrible, get rid of it. But if you have a carport, you get to keep it for 7 days. It doesn't seem to make any sense. And so I wonder if this is, again, one of those things where someone created language not realizing that language already existed. Or maybe trying to satisfy a problem that existed when the language was written. Not really sure. I wasn't here at the time. We can just speculate. But I think it's a bad idea, obviously, to have things that obviously contradict each other, and this is another example of that. What we want to do when it comes to enforcement, and I could probably speak for enforcement arms like police, like fire, inspectors of all types, is we're looking for objectivity. The less subjectivity we have as we enforce the law, the more fairly it's enforced, the better it's enforced, the better the results are. Well, we have some phrases, and these are very common in the law, that say nothing in the property maintenance code, in any property maintenance code in any city, says that something has to stay perfect. Perfect is never the mark that we have to hit. It's always in good condition, right? Just keep this in good condition and you're in compliance with the law. Okay, well, a roof in good condition. What if one shingle's missing? Is that still good condition? What if 10 shingles are missing? Is that still good condition? Again, there's this subjectivity that, well, I see one thing and this person sees another thing. The goal is to eliminate that by clarifying it. And so in this example here, when I describe floors, walls, and ceilings, I add language like free of holes, leaks, cracks, and any missing or broken materials. Okay? That's what good condition looks like. So that's what we're aiming for. And now the homeowner or the tenant, whoever's involved in working with us, they know what the goalpost is. Okay? It's not just, well, I thought it was in good condition, so I stopped fixing it. And then a code officer appears and says, well, that's not what I think is good condition. How about this? How about we don't let two humans decide this, because odds are they won't agree. How about we let the law decide? So, another issue that came up, and this one was interesting because the task force did not come up with a solution, in my opinion, to the second paragraph here. One of the most common issues that we have in code enforcement is the expansion of existing driveways. Expanding them, extending them, and the question that comes up very frequently is, what material am I allowed to use? Well, the law says that you shall design new driveways to be of a certain material, and our city concrete. But it does not mention, well, what if I want to expand my driveway? Pull it back, expand it out. And we've gotten those questions, and it's a hard, if not impossible, question to answer, because the code just doesn't go into it. The codes, especially the zoning ordinances, cover commercial usually very well. But residential parking situations, sometimes they're like the redheaded stepchild of parking ordinances. The driveways just get forgotten. And so we had a healthy debate in the task force. If you have a concrete driveway and you want to expand it, what can you use? Can you use asphalt? Can you use concrete? Does it have to be the same material? And I didn't get a sense by the time that discussion was over that the task force really landed anywhere. Some folks thought asphalt was okay because asphalt and concrete are both permanent surfaces, and so that's close enough. And other people thought, no, concrete should be expanded with concrete. It should look consistent. And it was just kind of split down the middle there. And so what you see here is actually my recommendation, because I couldn't glean a real one from the task force. So when in doubt, my personal philosophy is go as consistent as possible to reduce complaints, to make ordinances easier to read. You have concrete, expand with concrete. If you have asphalt, expand with asphalt. It just seems like the simplest solution. And when you have two different surfaces, even if they're both legal, something about the way they appear to the eye bothers folks, and the complaints start, which is what I've had several of those since I've been here. And so clarifying this, again, in the law helps the officers and the reader understand what they are and aren't allowed to do. Some folks might think that my recommendation is too strict, and they're welcome to feel that way, of course, but this is how I got there. When in doubt, shoot for consistency. That's what I do. Another topic that was mentioned was increasing code enforcement officer discretion. The task force felt that in some cases, a code enforcement officer, under the laws we have now, were sometimes forced to deal with minor things over major things. And this is one of the examples I gave at the last presentation in May. We have here 3 fences, all of which are in violation under the current law. And they're all in violation under the language I'm proposing, which again is just an example, it's not official language. But wouldn't it be nice if the code officer could focus their time on the one that's the most hazardous at this moment, which is obviously this one here, right? Children, pool, attractive nuisance, very dangerous. Is that one in violation over there? Absolutely. But shouldn't we perhaps focus on the most significant things first? The way the code is currently written, it makes it difficult for an officer to do that. So a more broad set of language gives us a little bit more wiggle room to say, yes, I can deal with all of these, but I'd like to deal with this one first before anyone gets hurt. Some language that the task force reviewed was seen as weaponized. There apparently has been some activity, this kind of neighbor versus neighbor mentality in certain neighborhoods, I guess, over the years. And some of the language the Code Enforcement Task Force honed in on as contributing to that. And so this was a common one that we had a good discussion about, was about lighting. My neighbor's lights are too bright, and I don't like it. Okay, well, the task force felt that that was more of a neighbor and a neighbor working things out, that didn't warrant the city stepping in and refereeing that. What my office should be focused on is public safety. In this example, meaning eliminating any driving hazards or glare that might result coming out towards the street. But a neighbor and a neighbor having a disagreement over a light, is that really what you want a code enforcement officer to deal with, that deep into the woods? And the task force said, no, we didn't think so. That's what they said. So I said, okay. So you can see here that the public nuisance language was taken out, and we leave in the traffic hazard language. We're looking at the public safety, not neighbor versus neighbor. And again, this is another example of language coming up again. Landscape lighting should not create an offensive glare to occupants of surrounding properties. That's just another way of saying neighbors. And so taking these two sets of language and combining them to one broad set of language that says, my office is going to focus on the public health and safety of this situation. If neighbors have trouble with neighbors, we're going to trust you folks to act like adults and work it out. That was the goal of the task force. Now, there were some state regulations, and everything on this slide is actually recommendations from me, not from the task force. In several places, we veer from state law. And I'm not saying that it's always a good idea to meet up with state law, because you do have some wiggle room. But in these occurrences, I think that it is a good idea to match with state law. For starters, that first paragraph, currently, the law says that if you receive a notice from our office, that notice is on the books for the rest of the calendar year. So for the rest of the year, you need to make sure you don't commit that violation again. Because if you do, you won't get another notice, you're gonna go to court because you've been warned and for some reason it happened again. Well, when January comes around, it's a big reset for everybody in the city, a big reset. Okay. The problem here is one of fairness. If you get written up or if you get an NOV in December, you've only got to hang in there for 2 or 3 weeks and then you get a reset. But if you get written up today, you're walking on eggshells for 6 months. And that is a bit of a fairness issue. The state says that when you get a notice, it will be good for the entire 365 days. So everyone gets that 12-month kind of stay of execution. It's just that stay. But in this case, the way our law is written now, it seems unfair. And I think that's why the state wrote the law the way it did, was to keep things on a fair level. And it does let my office more effectively deal with chronic offenders. When I first arrived here, it was in October, and we had a chronic offender get written up in November and December, and then reset January. And the complainants are calling me saying, why aren't your officers doing anything? And my answer was, they are, but January reset, we have to start all over. And again, some of these are significant safety issues. Should we really be starting all over with chronic offenders? Probably not. Inoperable vehicles. Vehicles are always an interesting topic because the state goes into them, and the state covers vehicle violations very clearly, so we tend not to veer from them. The one thing that I recommended here was our code currently says that an inoperable vehicle that stays inoperable for 45 days becomes junk. Well, the state only gives those vehicles 30 days. A junk vehicle is one of the most significant hazards that a community can have. They're called an attractive nuisance. They attract children. And the law, it takes them so seriously that the state says if you don't deal with your junk vehicle, the city can take it away and you won't get it back. It's not like an impoundment. It's you lose that car. It can never be titled again. It can never drive on the road again. It's a very serious matter. Well, for some reason, our code is giving people more time than the state for this significant hazard that we acknowledge needs to be eliminated. So my recommendation, again, in this instance, is to revert to what the state already has, 30 days, not 45. We want to get the vehicle fixed or out of there as soon as possible so that someone doesn't get hurt. This final paragraph here at the bottom, this is a little bit of a discussion. It's kind of an aside, but city administration and I have spoken about the possibility of code enforcement assisting with vehicles on the street. Typically, code enforcement does not address vehicles in the street. If you imagine a road, we are from the curb out, which is private property. The police deal with the curb in, which is that's public property, that's the road, okay? Well, we have acknowledged that there are a number of vehicles on the street that need attention. Flat tires and such, and going along with the discussion we just had, some of these roads were very cramped. And some of them, we might be able to get some breathing room if we get some vehicles off the street. So what administration has proposed is to take some of that responsibility off of the police department and give it to my office, since we are in neighborhoods anyway. That will free up the police department to deal with more emergency-related things, the highway, and just emergency issues. And we can assist with getting some inoperable vehicles off the street because we're in these neighborhoods all day anyway. So you'll notice that these two paragraphs are exactly the same, except one says police department and one says code enforcement. We're just, the suggestion here is just to move responsibility. This one has been a tricky one, the RV situation and living in a vehicle. The task force felt very strongly about this one, and I explained some of the issues with enforcement. But here's what we essentially have. The law does not allow sleeping, living in a vehicle. But then you have some vehicles that are meant to be slept in. They're built with that in mind. So not only do you have that to deal with as an enforcer, but you also have to deal with those folks that think you get different kinds of hazards from these large vehicles. You get view obstructions and things that some smaller vehicles don't bring to us. And so how do we deal appropriately with RVs? And those of you on the council, I believe, received an email from the city manager going over the history of RVs in the city. And it was very helpful to me because I didn't know the history of it, but it's obviously been kind of a back and forth issue. So we talked about it a bit on the task force, and what they decided was that we would eliminate the housekeeping, living, sleeping quarters verbiage in the law. And here's essentially why. Because it is unenforceable in a reasonable sense. A code officer driving down the road cannot tell what's going on inside that RV. We don't know if someone is, I've heard excuses, I'm using it as an office, I've heard that. We don't know if they're living in it. We don't know if the grandparents are just visiting. We don't know. And the truth is, we cannot go poke around inside. So the code officer is left with essentially whatever they're told. And when someone is told it's illegal to live in your vehicle, are you living in your vehicle? They're going to go, no. That's exactly what I would do. So it being unenforceable warranted its removal. Now, there is a note that I made here because I know this has caught some attention. This can possibly be addressed some other ways. If you look down in the bottom left hand of the slide, living or sleeping in a vehicle can be enforced perhaps as a certificate of occupancy violation or land use violation. Your property was approved for a single-family home. You were not given permission to live in a vehicle here. So that's a certificate of occupancy issue or a land use issue. This land is for homes only, not for bedrooms on wheels, essentially. Okay, so just because we're taking out of the property maintenance code does not mean that it's a free-for-all. There are still other avenues that might be more appropriate. And so zoning and COs could offer that. The trees and shrubs and stumps are the focus of the next paragraph, and the Code Enforcement Task Force avoided it completely. They did not want to tackle this topic. They wanted to leave it completely to the council. And unfortunately, Ms. Williams, you're now on the council, so it's come back around to you. But I was not here at the time of the initial tree stump discussion, I believe in January of 2020. And so I went back and watched the videos. And it was a very interesting discussion that folks had. And what I gleaned from it was that all tree stumps in the front yards were considered essentially nuisances, and the city council wanted them removed. By the end of the meeting, that was where I thought everyone had landed. And I may need to be corrected on that because I wasn't here, but that's what I sensed. Well, in looking at the law, that's not exactly what the law says. The law says any tree that is removed in accordance with this section shall have the tree stump removed. But this section only talks about hazardous trees. It doesn't talk about a tree that someone said, you know what, I don't want that tree anymore. I don't want it in my yard. It's perfectly healthy, I just don't want it. Cut it down. Those people get to keep their stumps. But other folks have to go through the expense of removing them or grinding them and so on. Again, there's a bit of a fairness issue here, and I think it was unintentional, but is there a way to fix it? If I am correct, and it was the intention of the council to eliminate front yard stumps or as much as possible, then I believe that language needs to be clarified. So any vegetation that's hazardous, doesn't matter what kind, it should all be removed if it's hazardous, first of all. And then secondly, a tree that is removed for any reason should have its stump removed as well, or grinded down. And I threw in here 6 inches, and here's why. The first set of language talks about removing the tree stump or grinding it to grade level. I did some research. My staff and I called 7 different landscapers and got quotes for tree removal and grinding and so on. And what we found was the average price to remove a tree, to cut a tree down that was so big was about $250 to remove a dead tree. And that was just cutting. And so in my language here, let's say we cut it and leave 6 inches behind, 6 inches of a stump. The average price was $250. To now bring in a grinder and grind that stump down to the ground doubled the price. And I didn't even give them, I gave them an example of a tree that was 3 feet around. I'm not talking some of the massive trees in these yards. So one of the reasons why I left, I thought, to allow 6 inches of stump behind is because I felt that the potential hazard was eliminated and the added expense on homeowners was not worth the benefit of eliminating those remaining 6 inches. That's why I came up with what I did. The task force and I discussed inoperable vehicles, and this was a good example of something that they felt was overly strict. Imagine a Mercedes in someone's driveway that looks great. It could start up and drive the second the keys are in the ignition, but the stickers are out of date. Well, that might be a child's car and they're off in college. That might be the missus' car and she's in the hospital. I've heard all of these things too, and a lot of them ring true to me. And so someone who receives a notice from our office would say, well, why would I renew this vehicle? It's not even mine, it's my kids, and they're not here. She'll do it when she gets back from college. That makes sense to me. But under the current definition of an inoperable vehicle, if you have out-of-date stickers, you're inoperable. You're essentially broken, even though there's no indication that that car won't start. And the task force thought that that was too strict. So that language was removed about the stickers. Now what I did on the backside was I added language about dead batteries, because what is a common excuse that our office hears is, oh, that car runs, it just doesn't have a battery. Well, then it doesn't run. It needs a battery. It needs to be able to start and come to life. Well, that vehicle runs, I just got to replace the battery. So that's a common issue that we hear. And again, this is an attempt to make things more objective too. The law says dead batteries aren't good enough. So in this example, you get a pass on the stickers, but you need to have a live battery in there. Okay? Rollout containers shall be stored in a manner that's not visible from the street. I know that this also has been up for discussion many times, and the task force again felt that it was too strict, that we were wandering into HOA land. And so what they came up with was that rollout containers can be stored in the side or rear of a building. That's what they decided. As long as it's not facing the road, they were okay with it. Well, I went a step further again and said that it could be in the front of the property as long as it was invisible. So to keep the invisibility factor there, but to allow the code enforcement task force's feelings to also remain, that the side isn't so bad, essentially is what the task force said. I added the language about commercial dumpsters because our office does receive complaints about dumpsters on commercial properties, blowing open and trash scattering across residential properties. That's very upsetting to people, especially when they call our office for help and we tell them, if the trash is on your property, it's now your responsibility. That is very upsetting to them, and I don't blame them at all. So by adding this little bit of verbiage here, it will allow my office to hold the right people accountable. Your trash is blowing across the neighborhood, keep your lids closed. So, a little bit more on vehicles. The parking ordinance, which I warned the task force about, is currently very difficult to read, and it's partly because there are so many variables. The current parking ordinance uses 8 different variables to explain to you where you can park. The kind of vehicle you have, what kind of yard you have, and like lot you have, and then where are you parking, front, side, or rear. So there are all these different permutations that can happen. And this law got very heavy. I'll be very honest, when I first arrived, I wrote 3 handwritten pages of notes to try and break it down. That's how thick it was. And I explained that to the task force, that if you want to keep these rules, that's totally fine. But it needs to be clarified. That's all I said. Well, the task force eventually decided, you know what, we think it's just too much altogether. We think that there should be 2 kinds of vehicles. Vehicles and inoperable vehicles. Vehicles and motor vehicles. Motor vehicles drive or move on their own. Vehicles don't. So a trailer. So there are vehicles that move on their own, and there are vehicles that get pushed or pulled, okay? And that's it. Every vehicle would be broken down into one of those categories, and they would all follow the same rules, perhaps with 1 or 2 exceptions. For example, the law currently says that a vehicle that isn't self-propelled, like a trailer, has to have blocks under the wheels to make sure it doesn't move on its own, slide down a driveway. That's probably a good one to keep, probably. So beyond something like that, the task force wanted to eliminate the confusion and just say, you're either this or that, and you all follow the same rules, with few exceptions. Again, an example of what they thought were overly stringent HOA-like standards. There's an entire section in the outside storage area of the ordinance that says things like, you can have things in your front yard, but they can't be so tall. Your flower beds can't be more than 1 foot high. Your lawn furniture can't be more than 42 inches high. And this was seen as very, very strict. It's also, again, it starts to crawl into that unenforceable category because the officer is not allowed to just wander onto the property with a tape measure and measure things. That can't happen. And so is this really enforceable? Is it necessary? And the task force decided it wasn't. So a suggestion for new language would be, well, how about instead of regulating the height of things, why don't we just make sure that whatever you have in public view is in good condition? This is a broken fountain that's full of water, probably stagnant and breeding mosquitoes. That's a significant health hazard to the entire community. That is beautiful lawn furniture. Councilwoman Williams, I had the pleasure of getting to know you on the task force. What do you think of that furniture?
I like it.
You like it?
I'll have it.
Yeah, $350. That looks like something you'd have in the front of your house, right? Yeah, it's 3 inches too tall. You can't have it. You just can't. So isn't it more that my office should focus on these instead of that? The task force thought yes. So those are examples of, again, some of the changes that we're looking to make. And if you all have any questions about anything I went over, I'd be happy to answer them.
Mr. Bonanno, thank you very much. Very thorough. I'll start to my right. Councilmember Driscoll, any questions?
Not at this time.
Councilmember Rotana?
I do. I have a number, but I think I'm gonna wait until we get the full version with all of the track changes, just to see all the different changes, and then I'll speak with you separately about those. Thank you.
Councilmember Lynn?
I do, so I might as well start this. And I'll go back to page 7 to start, and that is what if residents don't want grass and weeds 12 inches high? You know, we're increasing by 50% over what it currently is. And, you know, high grass and weeds bring critters, mice, as well as other bugs, mosquitoes, and fleas and ticks. So, you know, 12 inches is not helping to, in my mind, helping to make our city look better. So, but I would like to hear from the people on that, so I'm sure I will next week at Town Hall. So, and on page 7, you've said that trash is been eliminated. But what about from storage under a carport? But what about trash stored in the front or side yards and being visible to the street?
That's already prohibited.
Okay. All right. So, as we move along page 8, my question here is, when do you ever see interior surfaces? When does your department ever see interior surfaces as it relates to floors, walls, ceilings, et cetera?
Sure. Our office inspects every apartment complex every year. So we are going into a percentage of apartments as part of the multifamily license requirement. So there's that. And then we also we receive complaints from tenants any time of the year. My landlord hasn't fixed this, you know, that kind of thing. And if they give us permission, we can go inside then. And so those are 2 examples of when we would go inside.
Does that include rent houses too, or homes that we know are being rented?
Yes. Yeah, as long as we have permission from the occupant, we can go in, or a warrant, which hasn't had to happen yet since I've been here. But yeah, we'll go in as long as the person gives us permission, or if they're part of this mandatory multifamily license program.
Okay. And then on page 8 also, as we're talking about driveways, is there a limit to the amount of paved surface area allowed for residential property?
There is. I don't remember off the top of my head what it is, but there is a percentage that can't be, there's green space requirements. And Danielle, do you happen to know?
So they're allowed 67% in their front yard, basically, from the house to the street, they're allowed 67% concrete coverage.
Thank you.
Okay. So we haven't been able to address, or maybe you can't address at this point, a situation like I have one that we know of in my district where the occupant is parking construction equipment all in the backyard. They have a big gate that swings open, they have vehicles and all sorts of other construction equipment parked in the backyard. There is no backyard. It is all dirt and vehicles and equipment parked on dirt. But because it's in the backyard, behind a really high fence, nobody can see it. And we can't drone it, we can't. And Hugh and I, Hugh did a stakeout one time trying to wait for them to open the gate so he could take pictures and whatnot. But the workers knew that he was sitting out there, so they didn't open the gate. They waited him out for him to leave. But that's still not something that can be addressed.
Not, if it's out of public view at this time, then no, it wouldn't be something my office could address.
Okay. And then what about driveway conditions for cracked and broken driveways?
Those are covered, and that would be an example of something I would expand on. Driveway surfaces have to be in good condition. Well, that needs to be expanded to be, cracks, potholes, things like that are hazards to vehicles or persons. So that does exist, but it's one of those I would flesh out.
Okay, because there are many homes that have broken driveways. Okay. Okay. Bear with me. So on page 10, where you're talking about the weaponized language, I don't know how often that happens, that things are usually escalated to that level. I gotta believe that it's probably not as common as we think, but it could possibly happen. So if there's a situation where a neighbor just simply doesn't like somebody else's lights on their house or whatever, you're saying that's a neighbor-to-neighbor dispute?
Yes, under the recommendations that you saw today, yes.
Okay. And then with respect to conforming to state regulations, the only thing that is defining, let's say, an inoperable vehicle that's on the street would be if it had a flat tire, was wrecked, but not if it did not have current license plate and inspection sticker.
Correct, under the recommendations.
Okay. You are not supposed to drive a vehicle that does not have current license and inspection.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you not include that in here?
Because it's not being driven. It's sitting on the street. It's not being driven.
There's two sets of regs. One's for junk motor vehicles, which were controlled by state law as to what constitutes a junk motor vehicle. And then we have the ability to regulate inoperable vehicles that doesn't have to do with our ability to go out and seize junk motor vehicles from private property. So there's two tracks of regulations we're talking about.
Okay. But is that something that can be changed if the will of the people is to change that?
My office enforces what the council decides. So I imagine if for some reason one change doesn't work out, you all could agree to revert back to the way it was. We enforce what's on the books. That's it.
Okay. Well, again, we have not heard from true residents about this, so. So how would you handle somebody who is building a car from scratch, let's say, building a vehicle in their back, either driveway or side area? That's
Under the definition of, I'm sorry, let me back up and I'll show you.
okay.
One of the definitions that I'd like to have that is not currently in the property maintenance code is trash and debris. And when I've seen it in the past, it includes car parts. So you cannot have car parts scattered around. If you're building a car and you go in for the night, that thing you're working on, until it's a real car, that's just an inoperable vehicle. I shouldn't have to see it, I being neighbors and folks, unless it's a working, operable vehicle. If you want to build a car, that's great, but at the end of the day, you need to hide all of that. It's just outside storage and trash. So.
Okay. It's the instance that I'm specifically thinking of is where they have a tarp covering most of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sufficient or not?
No.
Okay. Okay. Then when you talk about vehicles used for living and sleeping, okay. But we didn't say anything about where they can be parked and the type. So there are numerous instances in the city where people have campers, RVs, boats, et cetera, motorhomes, not only parked half on a driveway, half on grass, but we also have people that have campers and similar type vehicles that are parked in the driveways that are on jack stands. And these properties weren't built for that type of storage. And nobody's saying you can't own one of those vehicles, but the question is, what is the responsible way for storing such type of vehicle. And we have not addressed that. That's still something that needs to be determined, correct?
Based on the recommendations that the task force made, they would be treated like every other vehicle. So you cannot park on the grass, you cannot create a view obstruction, you cannot block the sidewalk, you can't have flat tires. They would just fall into line with every other vehicle. So
Okay,
that's how it would stand.
Then I could see view obstruction needing further clarification, because if I live next door to somebody who's got a 32-foot trailer parked in their driveway and I can't see down the street where I used to, then that's a view obstruction.
It is, and the definition of a view obstruction would be something that creates a hazard. So if my neighbor, for example, has one of these large trailers and I can't back out of my driveway without seeing a pedestrian walk behind me, that's a view obstruction. That thing needs to move so that I can see a pedestrian before they step out in front of my car. If I'm turning a corner and I can't see oncoming vehicles or pedestrians because this monster of an RV is on the corner lot, that's a problem. Not, well, I used to be able to see the sunset and now I can't. That's not a view obstruction that we're talking about. We're talking about safety hazards.
Okay. And the stump requirement, where you said no more than 6 inches, that was really subjectively decided by you?
Well, another city I spoke to, Flower Mound, actually has, if I'm not mistaken, they have a 12-inch grass limit. And I asked about their stumps, I was curious about that, and they have a 12-inch stump limit. They said, well, why not let it match the grass? If you're gonna let the grass be that tall, why not let the stumps be that tall? And I said, well, I wasn't sure if that would fly. And so what my reason behind 6 inches was, in my opinion, you could cut that low without getting a grinder out, which would reduce the cost of someone coming into compliance. You can't cut to grade, right? You'd have to cut and then grind to grade. Well, if you cut as low as you can, let's say we aim for 6 inches, that keeps the price of compliance down for homeowners. So I thought 6 inches was reasonable. But yes, that was a subjective number for me.
Okay. Okay, we already covered expired plates and whatnot. All right, I will stop there, but I would like to make a statement at the end of this.
Make it now, please.
Happy to do so. So, when I was thinking about this, and when we look at code enforcement, we need to ask ourselves, what is the minimum acceptable standard that we want for our city? And what will be the metrics for measuring performance standards for the city? That's going to differ for each one of us and in each person's eyes. However, one central theme that I've been hearing from my constituents is that they want the city to look nice and clean. Lowering our standards seems wrong in their eyes. As we promote redevelopment with things that add value to our city, like the demo rebuild program, why would you want to lower the standards for the city? Some of what we see now throughout the city does not help the value of new homes that are being built here. Stumps, high grass and weed, for one. Trailers, campers, boats, and RV in front yards and on grass. And of course, alleyways and easements that are overgrown. Some residents use their front yards as auto maintenance facilities. Others have as many as 4 accessory buildings on their property. We have driveways that cannot hold the cars and other vehicles that reside at a property, so they overflow into the street, often parking in front of their neighbors' homes, which creates a whole other set of problems. There are homes that are vacant, yet have junk vehicles or inoperable vehicles parked on the property. These are essentially residential storage facilities. And in fact, some homes are being used as warehouses. simply for storage with nobody living in them. We, the city, are investing in our library and our rec center to make them look first class. Our parks are some of the best in the Metroplex. We are a city and a park. So why would we want to lower the standard for the homes around these amenities? Having a higher standard is not discriminatory. It's something that everyone can do easily enough. I believe it's a responsibility that comes with home ownership or with renting. Most residents keep neat properties, and as do most renters. It seems like we're sacrificing the appearance of our city for the convenience of others, and that's what troubles me. And so I'm anxious to hear what residents who will be attending my town hall next week will have to say on what is being discussed. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lynn. Councilmember Williams?
Again, thank you so much. That was a huge undertaking that you helped us go through with going through these code enforcement. I'm gonna remind everyone on that task force was a true resident. So they were elected or recommended by their city councilperson. So the task force was made up of true residents, and I think we did a really good job of taking a whole bunch of different people with a whole bunch of different ideas on what code enforcement should and should not be, and we came to a consensus on almost everything. So, and a great majority consensus on everything. I don't think there's anything in your presentation that was lowering our standards. It was more about clarification and making sure that whatever we were doing was enforceable and was along with every other standard. So I think you did a great job, and I think our task force did a great job as well. The only thing that I have a question on that tree stump removal with the 6 inches, is that going to include people who already have tree stumps? So I think when we talked about it that day, we had something like 400 residents who would automatically be in code violation as soon as that got passed.
Yeah, there's nothing grandfathered about tree stumps, you know, that kind of phrase, which we try to avoid, but that kind of grandfathering type thing, that doesn't apply to trees or vegetation at all. So yes, in theory, anyone with a tree stump right now over 6 inches would in theory have to come down to 6 inches.
Okay.
So yes.
We can provide a grace period. Once you decide what you want, and if there's a stump remaining at all, we can provide a grace period by which they have to get the compliance.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and a lot of our citizens are facing economic hardships that they weren't a year ago or 2 years ago. And, you know, all of a sudden having them have a $250, you know, extra bill, that could be, if they don't shell that out, they are then in violation. I think we need to be careful. I would just advise that we would need to be careful about that. I think that's putting some undue hardships on some people. And so that would be my recommendation. The other thing that I know that we talked about on the hazardous vegetation, maybe defining what hazardous vegetation is.
Yes.
Because you know, some neighbors feel like oleander is hazardous, and others, you know, not
Yes.
so much, or pencil plants, or you know, things that would be harmful if they're, you know, if their little animal, their little pet ate, you know, thorns, you know, and so I could see where, you know, if a neighbor didn't like someone's rose bushes, because they were extra thorny, that they could, you know, then, so I think we maybe need some clarification on that hazardous vegetation, but overall, I think it's great, and I think, you know, I know our whole task force was very much in line with what you were recommending, and, you know, that we just had a lot of redundancies and a lot of confusion, and we were just trying to clean that up. I don't think anyone was trying to lower the standards of our city. So I think our city is performing on every other metric our city is performing great, so I don't think tree stumps are hurting our home values too much right now, so that's all I'd have to add.
Thank you. Councilmember Merritt?
Thank you for the presentation. Couple of questions for you. Obviously, Councilwoman Rutana, well, you have a new role now. Pardon me, I'll get used to that. We don't have the final product yet. So I think there was some reference in the last meeting that we had that we might have a final product. This is not it, and we'll just agree that this is not
Right.
the final product. That's good. Wanted to address a couple of the slides, and you actually have definitions up here, for example. You have current and proposed. You're keeping the old
Yes.
definition and not simply eliminating
No.
those, and that's minor issue, but I wanted to at least go through that. And I'm also interested in kind of making sure that when we talk about the other chapters of the code, this particular session was talking about chapter 56. Are we going to be making those changes to 34, 22, and 62? I did pretty good.
Good job.
At the same time, and so therefore, public notice would need to incorporate that type of broadening of the scope. And so your effort and your office's efforts of making sure that we get through the redundancies and all the other issues that you've outlined in your presentation today will address not only 56, but the entirety of the code or those 4 chapters? I'm trying to understand what your
Wherever
scope
there's
is.
an inconsistency or a need to
Very
tweak
good.
the language consistent with what you finally decide.
That's fine, and I appreciate that very much, because I want to make sure that we're talking, that this is a big set of codes and chapters, divisions and articles, and so when we get into this, it's very important that we're opening up a very big document and looking for the changes that are necessary to make sure that it's easy for the reader, easy for your team to enforce, and easy for us to manage going forward. Because as you stated before, as state laws change, the ripple effect impacts us. And so I want to make sure that we're talking that breadth of scope and not just chapter 56.
No,
of the
we're-
property code.
We're talking essentially a new 56.
Correct.
And then cleaning what should have been in 56 all along, just a scrub, I guess.
Understood.
Yeah, so we're gonna address all of it.
Very good. A couple more questions, if I may. Check my notes. So we have a discrepancy existing right now in grass height. This doesn't have to do with a recommendation from the task force. We have on the books 12 inches in one chapter and 8 inches in another. How did we get there? Just oversight? Is that perhaps that we didn't cross-reference like we're doing now? And that's how we've arrived here.
That's where we
But I
are.
think that's one of the things that, in order for this not to happen in the future, is what we kind of talked about last time, is making sure that we have like a sunset of all the codes.
Oh,
So, yeah, but I think, I agree, I think that's where we are now, because I think there were different probably entities working on different things. But hopefully with the sunsets, I think it'll help. I know it'll help.
Well, it might move on to 56 instead
Yeah.
of it being
Correct.
in these,
Correct, yeah.
all these different
So
places.
I want to make, I guess I'm going back to perhaps Councilman Lynn's statement. We have a problem on the books right now. It didn't come from the task force. So I want to make sure.
No, I get that.
I want to make sure that that's clear, and that's a problem that we have to deal with around this table to figure that out. That's not the task force saying 8 inches. They recommend 8 inches, but we have 2 numbers on the table we need to figure out. So,
Well, and I'll tell you just on that, we looked at every city around us, and every city around us has 12 inches, because that's the standard. Because one good rain is gonna put you over 8 inches. And there's no point in having our task force trying to go around with tape measures, you know, after a rain because someone's mad because they haven't mowed yet. So, and they felt like giving them 12 inches gave people, you know, who were working, maybe it rained, you know, all weekend and they're working and they aren't gonna be able to get to the lawn until Friday. Well, it gives them some leeway to do that before, you know, neighborhood watchdogs start calling and complaining that they're, you know, they're above the limit. And so, and I will tell you, on that grass issue, that was unanimous. There was not one person. So every single district was represented in that task force, and every single one of them said, yeah, 12 inches, that's standard.
I think it's the important part to know, right, that task force was specifically ensured that every single district was represented.
Correct.
And I think at the end of the day too, regardless of what we decide, I think it's incumbent upon us to provide that refresher to our residents. 'Cause I think a lot of them, you don't know, like, when I was reading through it last time, there were certain things I was like, wait, I did not know that. We need
Right.
to, you know?
Right.
And so, I think it'd be a great refresher for folks that maybe, and again, to your point, you know, those things have been discrepancies on the books for years.
Yeah.
And we're now addressing them. And so it's not the task force, it's things that people just didn't know that they were there. People don't know what they don't know. So I think at the end of the day, I think it's gonna help our city because there's certain things that a lot of folks don't even know. And our code enforcement guys are so inundated with all these other things that are really true hazardous things
Right.
that it's just sometimes it's maybe an oversight, who knows? But I think at the end of the day, I think it's gonna be a great refresher for our community. And hopefully when we sunset everything else, it'll be other great refreshers on other things to come, so.
Councilmember Lynn?
Well,
Yes.
did you have 100% attendance at all of the meetings?
No, right not.
Okay.
I'm not finished.
Did you have it at the first meeting?
No.
Councilmember Merritt?
Yeah, one. The definition of good is gonna be a problem. I hope that your office will come and with the attorney's assistance will come up with a workable definition of what good is. I understand not broken, working with good is going to be, I'm just gonna say, gonna be hard. And so I'm very interested in seeing what the recommendation for that.
There will be some terms of art that are commonly accepted.
Sure,
that we'll be
reasonable
using.
person, those type of things.
Otherwise, you would have a much bigger code than it already is.
Understood.
I mean, it was huge when we started here years ago. And you don't want to have to address everything that possibly would fall within that good state of repair, because it has a common understanding.
And so definitions in this particular section, chapter 56, is the tendency to have a definition table for the entire code of ordinances, or definitions in the sections, or is it a combination of both, a hybrid, if you will, that you're providing definitions that are assisting the reader in that particular chapter, but they also apply to other areas of the code?
I'm sorry, did you?
I was going to say it'd be a hybrid.
Okay.
Because
Perfect, that's fine.
Because there'll be a definition for inoperable for a junk motor vehicle that won't necessarily apply
Understood.
elsewhere.
And I think, again, it's the structure of how this is going to be placed and put together by your office. Super important to understand that structure and how these interact and connect going forward. So, how long do you think it'll take to deliver a red line type document?
My goal was to have a new ordinance or a new code for you by the 15th, June 15th. That's the goal.
Swinging for the fences.
That's right.
Very good.
I think that the changes are needed, you know, what we have is okay, but we can do better. And I think we just need to get to better as soon as we can. So that's what I'm gonna try to do.
Again, thank you for the presentation.
And as we go through that and start making the red light changes, we may find some other things that are redundant to eliminate as well.
And so is that, when you say the 15th, is that you're gonna deliver to council the red line version, or that's something that's going to be on the agenda for potential approval on the 15th?
The original goal, which is still my goal, is to have something for you to review and approve on the 15th. But I do have to finish, part of me finishing the draft was to hear what you all had to say today, obviously. And then I have to finish drafting the code and letting legal look at it, of course. And so it's a process like all things. So I'm hoping the process finishes in time for the 15th. I don't think it's the end of the world if it doesn't hit the 15th and it hits the next one. But that's what, again, swinging for the fences.
I think what we're gonna look at is getting a draft, us reviewing it, have another discussion, and then come back and make some decisions, because
That's totally fine.
that's gonna be a huge discussion that night,
Yeah.
and if things are changing,
We don't want-
we don't need to be making it on the fly.
Okay.
And that's gonna be my recommendation for that.
Yeah, no, that was my, I would hate for us to rush it, so no, thank you, I think that's great. I did have one more thing to add.
One more and then,
It's not really something to add, it's more of I know last time we talked about a repair program, because I asked the question of the code violation funds go into the general fund, and I potentially talked about potentially having a separate program for those funds, because things like the cracking of the concrete, it's very expensive. And so just being able to provide that avenue for folks, and obviously exploring it and researching it with your team to figure out what works best, but that's something I would like to explore, maybe not in conjunction with code, because I think we need to focus on that, but maybe thereafter. And so I would love to talk to you about that specifically.
Sure, absolutely.
Perfect,
I would
thank
too.
you.
I love that idea.
all right. Councilmember Lynn?
So, when we go to undertake things like this, I think for full transparency, we should have or allow for the citizens to comment.
They will be able to.
Thank you.
All right. I think you have enough to work on that draft.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Next is A4, discuss future agenda items. Councilmember Driscoll.
Mayor, I don't have any at this time.
Councilmember Ratana.
I do. I'd like to discuss the potential for a Hispanic Heritage Month event on the 25th of September. There are some funds that need to be approved, and so because it's at the very end of our fiscal year, I'd like to bring it up as an agenda item for discussion, already something we can talk about with parts, so just need approval. So,
When would that be?
the event, we're looking at September 25th, right in the middle of Hispanic Heritage Month.
Settled.
Yes.
Councilmember Lynn.
No.
Councilmember Williams.
No items for me.
Councilmember Merritt.
I actually have two. A new guy coming in hot. How about that?
You only get 2 for the year, though.
I only get two.
I'm saving mine up. We have budgets coming.
Rolling big, so.
ahead.
Let's talk, I would like to know where we are on a communication plan for the city. I know we are updating the web page, but I also know, and I've participated in Councilwoman Latana's town hall. We know Councilman Lynn is having a town hall. Communication and how we, as council people, get our message out to our constituents, super important. So I'd like to have an opportunity to discuss what's available, what is appropriate, what is perhaps outside the boundaries, that we should all be on the same playing field in that regard.
So council communication plan, not city communication plan.
Well, I think the city communication plan rolls into that to a degree. Obviously, when we're talking about the city's webpage, that's the site that most of our constituents, well, that is one way that most of our constituents get information. There are other channels, and I'd like to make sure, and Brady was around earlier, we have a new communications director. I'm sure he's got some fantastic ideas that have been floated, and I'm the new guy not to be the new woman with my partner here perhaps, like to understand what those are and get a bigger holistic picture. There's a lot going on. I think we have a fantastic story to tell. I think we have great events. We're planning other great events. I'd like to know how we can make sure our constituents get that message and get it from their representative. So that's communication. So hopefully that clarifies. The other one is, it sort of ties into a couple of other agenda items on today's docket related to water and water runoff. I'd be interested in getting updated and having a discussion on water issues. We have Tanglewood in my district. We have Brookhaven Club also in my district. We have today, we have the Brookhaven Village water drainage. There are a lot of issues to address. So I'd be interested in having a focused meeting or focused discussion meeting, pardon me, focused discussion on that. And maybe it's just for my education. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to add a potential conversation with council as ARP funds are looking to come into the city. I want to discuss at least the idea of setting aside a pot of money that goes to much needed items for the entire city, and then pots of money for each council member to be able to deploy within their own district for things that they think could benefit with this money, so that everyone feels that they're getting an equal share of certain things for their district. So that would be something that council would need to look at, talk about, and figure out what they want to do. Of course, it would need to confine with the guidelines of ARP and how to deploy those funds. But I think you all represent your district and your people. You all have different needs, and is there a way to help accomplish some of those goals with some of these funds that are coming through? So just something to discuss in the future.
You're talking about the latest federal dollars that are on the way?
Yes.
And I think we already had that on our to be discussed, but
I'm looking to discuss it in that capacity.
Isn't that 10.5 million? Something in the
Could be.
ballpark?
It's the American Rescue Plan.
All right, next is executive session. B1, council may convene into a closed executive session pursuant to section 551.072 of the Texas Government Code to deliberate regarding, discuss the purchase, exchange, lease, or sale of real property north of Farmers Branch Lane, south of Valley View, east of I-35, and west of Josie. Discuss the purchase, exchange, lease, or sale of real property located at 3940 Spring Valley Road. Council may convene into a closed executive session pursuant to section 551.087 of the Texas Government Code to deliberate regarding, discuss economic development incentives for Project Chase, and discuss economic development incentives for Project Billie Jean. We will recess and come back in about 8 to 10 minutes. The time is 4:42. Thanks. Dinner.